Welcome back to another edition of whatever this is. I'm not sure if it's a gimmick, if it's a podcast, or anyways, it is what it is. And guess what? We've got Bruce Rainnie coming up, the CEO of the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame. We recorded that a little while ago. We'll get into that a bit more. But the pressing news is the fact that the Halifax Mooseheads are now under new ownership, majority owner Sam Simon and the Simon Sports Group as part of Simon Group Holdings. And the resume on the Simon family, Sam Simon, extremely impressive. And I'm looking forward to seeing what they bring as owners of a Quebec Major Junior Hockey League team. Of course, Bobby Smith and the Mooseheads, we went over it ad nauseum about how the Mooseheads have raised the standard for CHL teams in the Q and brought the CHL coast to coast. I was speaking with a certain TSN personality a while back, and the question was raised, what's the most influential CHL franchise in the league? And I was making the push for her to say Halifax. She ended up saying Quebec, but I was saying, look, you got to go Mooseheads. And I know you could be a little worried. It might show some, she was worried about it coming off as homerism, but I said, no, you got to go Mooseheads because this is the team that truly made the CHL the Canadian Hockey League. It was no longer the hockey league from British Columbia to Quebec. And, of course, notwithstanding Newfoundland's there, they had the St. John's Fog Devils for a little bit, and who knows? Rumors and innuendo, maybe Newfoundland could end up back in the fold in the Quebec League in the near future. But we'll see where things transgress from there. It's certainly an attractive location for an expansion franchise, although the Newfoundland Growlers are doing quite well at the box office. So maybe in Newfoundland they enjoy their ECHL hockey and they'll stick with the Growlers. I mean, it's a semi-pro market. AHL did very well there. The Growlers are doing very well. So we'll see what happens with Newfoundland. But back here in Halifax, the Mooseheads, so many first-round draft picks. So many guys in the NHL, so many Stanley Cup winners, so much potential, so much talent that has been turned out of that organization over the years, as well raising the level for the Memorial Cup. Bobby Smith, great words in talking about how don't call it the Mem Cup around him. He's got a personal connection to the reason for that name being Memorial Cup, and you heard him talk about it in great lengths. I also was very happy to see him talk about Tyler Long at the event. Tyler, who told his mom Joanne it's a big occasion, so he had to dress up for the event. I love the shirt on him. A couple colors look like some of my suit jackets, but yeah, Tyler, good to see you dressed up for the occasion. For this Simon Group, though, I think they're going to bring in a lot of ingenuity and really take a look at the fan experience. Try to make things a bit more interactive when you go through the gates at Scotiabank Center. Leave the hockey operations to the crew involved. And one of the things that jumped out at me for talking about Sam Simon was a quote that he had, was that he'd rather invest in a mediocre company with fantastic people than the other way around. And the Mooseheads are, well, they're a fantastic company. They've got fantastic people. So it's win-win on both sides. The foundation's set. We'll see where the Mooseheads under the Simon Group Holdings. Again, apologies to because I said it wrong on the broadcast. It was Simon Group Holdings. Make sure I got that right. I'm excited to see where they go with this new venture in sports. Now, speaking of new ventures, last week I had George Matthews on. We went for a full hour. And it was a lot of fun talking with George because the man's got stories for days. He's been with the Columbus Blue Jackets for 13 years. So great to see him honored in the Prince Edward Island Sport Hall of Fame. But it was kind of a first run in doing this podcast format for the public. We did we recorded with Bruce a while back to see what this could look like. And we ran it up the chain. There was some talks of, okay, well, where will this fit in our schedule, and where will this fit in the workflow? Where will this fit in our programming. And every time these questions came up, it always came back to the gimmick from pre-COVID, when it was Kevin, Kenzie, myself, and kind of a rotating cast of characters. So, the gimmick, and again, and people, I'll be at rinks across Nova Scotia, and people come up and still talk about the pizza eating contest, or when they saw us at Halcon talking with Chewbacca, or just how much they enjoyed kind of the banter between us in the office, leading into our game weekends. And that's kind of where the spirit of this is now evolving to. It's now kind of become the gimmick, because again, it was one of those casualties of the pandemic where, we get the whole office upstairs together. We got a great team, and we'd sit around and we'd just talk. We'd just have fun. We'd, promote where we're going, but also just the gimmick videos. And again, it was the office gimmick. There was the pregame gimmick before Moosehead games, where Logan would join us. Sportsnet Rob Faulds joined us on the gimmick a few times. Patty McNeil would pop in for the Memorial Cup gimmick. Then there was post-game gimmicks. During the Q playoffs, we'd have a chance to sit down and discuss what we just saw. Halcon was a lot of fun because we were there capturing the spirit of the thing. The pizza eating contest that evolved from just a little comment from Kevin to us putting on a full production, and also getting everyone involved around the office. I mean, Matt Morris would be sitting out in the bullpen, and he'd be the first one to chirp up to say, hey, no, that game's going to be canceled in a week and a half because we're going to have a snowstorm, because he'd have his spaghetti maps out, and he'd be able to tell us, yeah, that game was canceled. And sure enough, he called it 10 days in advance that the game was canceled. So it was always, it's always weather watch and storm watch with Matt Morris around. But there was a big part of it as well that it was kind of old salty dog moves by myself, and it's a Reg Dunlop mentality of, okay, we gotta let's have a lot of fun, keep everyone engaged, keep everyone moving towards an end goal. And so that was kind of a trade-off, and a bit of levity from the gimmick, was to not just put a smile and be information on the other side of things, but really just to be an energy and a morale boost for our crew. Everyone upstairs working on it, and when we're on site, like the Big Mac, the Big Mac gimmick from before the Max game, where I ate a pound of beef before going on the ice. Yeah, we all had high spirits. I mean, it was a cool hand Luke moment of finishing the 50 eggs in a half hour. And if you haven't seen that movie, make sure you check it out. Another Paul Newman reference. But yeah, there was a spirit to the gimmick. So in the spirit of the gimmick, trying to capture the spirit of the thing with this style of podcast. So what you're about to see was filmed a little while ago with Bruce Rainnie, the CEO of the Nova Scotia Sports Hall of Fame. And I guess when it came to trying to find someone to have a pilot with, he's the perfect guy. He's the absolute perfect guy, because he's going to be able to talk. He's going to be able to pontificate. He's going to be able to be entertaining, hit the sound bites, and have a good story. And so with Bruce Rainnie, to tell some stories was a lot of fun. To sit down here and have him on the monitor there and have that going. And I got to say, like, what you're about to see, I mean, now it's kind of just become Ecamm Live and camera, mic, and away we go. But what you're going to see was a massive effort from a lot of people around around our office, because we set up a vMix. We had some live switching. We had Joel Gray. He's behind the camera right now. Big smile on him. He came up with a theme song for it. Joel, do you want to come over and come here, buddy? Get in here. Oh, do me a favor while we got a chance, and the mic's here. Could you tell everyone the name of the theme song?
Old Boy Pop in the Room.
And pop in the room is a wrestling term for popping the boys and the girls in the back. kind of an inside joke. And, old boy pop in the room is this guy. But anyway, it was a collaborative team effort. I mean, Lily Swim came up with some great Hawaiian shirt graphics, and it was great because I was like, let's go with the Hawaiian theme. And I wasn't wearing Hawaiian on the day, so I don't know if that really worked. But again, it's all experimental, and that's why it's become a gimmick. But back to Bruce Rainnie. Man, oh man, so exciting to sit down and hit record with Bruce for a half hour. So without further ado, here he is, the man, the myth, the legend, Bruce Rainnie. Boom. Welcome to the Mavs Gillis podcast here on Eastlink Community TV, and so happy to be joined for our first guest. He is an Olympic broadcaster, an institution from CBC, PEI, the president and CEO of the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame, and has the key to the city of Yarmouth. Bruce Rainnie. Bruce, great to have you aboard, man. How are you?
Mavs, I feel great after that intro. Hope I can live up to all of that, and really nice to be on your program.
Well, I can tell you what's living up for us right now is that the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame is really back where it belongs. I was expecting you to have a hard hat on, though, because you're doing a lot of renovations. How's the progress going in getting the Sport Hall of Fame back to where it belongs, and not just back, but expand it?
Yeah, it's going to be bigger than ever, Mavs, by about 33%, actually 32 point something. We haven't started official renovations yet. No hammer has hit a wall. No nail has gone into a wall. But we're deep into the rendering process, the design process. All of our permits are getting in order. So what I've been saying to people, and this is just to cover me, really, is that we'll be open sometime in 2023, probably fall of 2023, with a Hall of Fame that is, I think, really up to date, really fun for kids, really fun for families, and a place where hopefully when you leave, you want to come back as soon as possible. So that's our goal. It needed a facelift. It's going to get one, and we're back exactly where we should be, adjacent to Scotiabank Centre.
I can tell you, my dad and I, we've done a tour. We went across the Northeast, and we saw every Hall of Fame from pro sports, including, we also stopped in at Penn State, which was a smaller sport Hall of Fame. When you think about Hall of Fame buildings, what are some of the things that you feel need to be represented as attractions as well as tributes to the athletes, coaches, and builders?
I think, Mavs, it all comes down to storytelling. You want to tell these stories in as best detail as possible, in the most informative, entertaining way as possible. And you want to make sure that kids hear these stories, because embedded in all of these Nova Scotia stories are words like perseverance, I think intelligence, losing with grace, winning with humility. That's all endemic to the Nova Scotia athletes. So it's incumbent upon us to tell those stories particularly well, plus have some fun, make it interactive, have some things that kids can do, athletes against whom they can measure in terms of speed, height, whatever. So you're going to see really good storytelling in this Sport Hall of Fame through graphics, through visuals, through video, but also some just good old-fashioned fun for kids. So we're looking forward to that combo.
I love the stories that come out of induction night, and I love the stories that come out of Legends of the Hall. We've got season 4 coming up with Legends of the Hall. You're going to be taping here in October, November. Who are some of the guests that you're hoping to have on this year?
Well, we because of COVID, we had to shut down that program, which was really unfortunate because we didn't have an inductee class a couple of years ago. So we got to play some catch up. So we're going to see people on that show, hopefully, like Mark Dacey, who won a Brier back in 2004, like Kathy Mason, who became our first ever Special Olympic coach to be inducted. And the list will go on and on. And the nice thing about this program, Mavs, is that you know yourself that traditionally when you interview an athlete, you're looking for a 15 to 20 to 30 second soundbite, and that's all you're going to use because that's all you have time for. In the case of Legends of the Hall, we have close to a 30-minute program there where they can really tell their stories, and these stories are phenomenal. Everyone has overcome something. Everyone has come from a small town or place in Nova Scotia to achieve national or international acclaim. So their stories worth preserving, and you want them in detail, and you want them told by Nova Scotians.
I like that. We're going to talk about long form interviews, and we're going to get back to the 15 to 30-second clips. I'm going to start with long form. You're at Memorial Cup. You're on the stage with so many legends, so many names. but the one that sticks out is Guy Lafleur, and he's your hero. What is it like for you, I guess, and I'm assuming that was your final interview, final chance to speak with Guy before he passed. What was that like for you now when you look back at it, your interview with Guy Lafleur at the Memorial Cup?
Yeah, Mavs, he was my hero. He is my hero. And that was really the last major thing he did publicly before he got sick and went into that sort of that tailspin that was so quick and sad. But they say you should never meet your heroes because you'll always be disappointed. I can tell you that having spent a lot of days now with Guy Lafleur, not just that day, but several previously, there was no disappointment when you met this guy. He was, as great a player as he was, as exciting as he was that graceful as a human being, and he had time for everybody, made eye contact with everybody. When he signed an autograph, it was always accompanied by a handshake and a smile. He would listen to your story no matter how nervous you were. First time I ever interviewed him, by the way, the first thing I said to him was, "Mr. Lafleur, my name is Guy Rainnie." And he said, "Your name is Guy too?" And I said, "No, I'm just really nervous." And he laughed and I laughed. And wonderful guy, great sense of humor, and deeply, deeply missed by hockey fans in Canada because of all of the above.
I'm throwing out this term. Is that your Super Bowl ring of an interview? Is that the one that you look at and say, this is, I don't want to say proudest, but this is the moment that really encapsulate, man, I can't believe I get to do this?
Yeah, that would be the one that, I get excited every time I get a chance to talk to anybody, but that was the one that actually, caused sweat to form on the brow and hairs to stand up on the forearm. But my true Super Bowl interview, Mav, came November 14th, the year 2000. I was working for CBC in Halifax. And at that time, they gave me the satellite truck every night to go out and find something that would add some sort of live energy to the show. And this one particular night, I had booked a gymnastics exhibition at the Alta Gymnastics Club in Halifax. But there was a flu that ran through the crew, so they couldn't do it. So I had to scramble. And I found that a fiddler was releasing a CD at the Old Triangle, the restaurant in downtown Halifax. And I said, "Could we come cover your CD launch?" And she said, "Sure." And when she walked in, I was pretty impressed not only by her talent, but by her charisma. And that was 22 years, 18 years of marriage, and 2 little boys ago for myself and Kendra McGilvery. So that's how I met her during a TV interview for CBC. That's my Super Bowl for sure.
You actually have a ring from it now, I guess. So you actually got the ring out of it.
Yeah, hey, she got one too.
You always got to be prepared for anything in broadcast. And you talk about back in Yarmouth how you learned really to be able to, I'll let you tell a story about getting up the tree and down the tree, but that's a fine example of being able to think on the fly and making something happen.
Yeah, you mentioned Yarmouth. So people ask, how do you get into this business? And you couldn't do it this way anymore. I think I was kind of the last of a generation. But what I did is I got a degree at Dalhousie in chemistry and never really enjoyed it and loved broadcast. So I went to Yarmouth to work at a radio station there. And it was the greatest education you could ever imagine because you got to do everything: funeral announcements, sports, news, weather, open line shows. And you got to make mistakes. And I had a great old mentor by the name of Lou LeBlanc, who used to work at Country 101 here in Halifax, who told me that the best broadcasters ever are the ones that can climb a tree, get verbally stuck, okay, but get back down without anybody ever knowing they were in any sort of trouble. And that happens all the time. And you learned how to do that in Yarmouth. You learned how to, get ever so close to a mistake and then pull back just before you really made a bad one. And if you made a little one, you learn never to make it again. So I spent about 5 years in Yarmouth at this great little station called CJLS. Still have a lot of friends there. And for me, it was the greatest education you could ever imagine.
So we're going from the long form chat with, Guy Lafleur and having a chance to, it's probably been a long form interview for 22 years with Kendra. So that's the longest interview you've been doing. Let's go to the short form, and I want to talk about when you finally got to meet Sidney Crosby, and you're getting calls to go and talk to an 8-year-old hockey player. Do you recall in those first set of calls what you were thinking when people are telling you, "Hey, you got to go check out this kid. He's 8."
Yes, I totally do. I started at CBC in September of 1995, and that October the calls started to come, and they were saying, "Come do a story on this kid." And back then at CBC, there was one night camera, and it was normally assigned to political meetings or public meetings or just stories in the night. It was hard to get it for sports. and I had to really beg. And I also was hesitant because I thought, could an 8-year-old kid really be this good? And he better be this good if I'm going to beg for a camera. And it was the great legendary Nova Scotia sportscaster, Pat Connolly, who was a great friend of mine, who heard that I was trying to get a camera for this story. And he told me, is this about the Crosby kid? And he had this beautiful deep voice. And I said, yeah. He goes, go do it. Go do it. Go do it. So we went to do it, and I'll never forget the score. It was 13-9 for the Cole Harbor Wings over the Shearwater Flyers, and little number 9, who was by 3 years the youngest player on the ice, I think had 11 points, 9 goals, 2 assists. And at the end of that, we sat him down in the dressing room for his first ever interview on TV with a little gap between his teeth. And the neat thing was sort of the quiet confidence and humility that defines him to this day. It was present even then, because my first question to him was, when did you know you were a pretty good hockey player? And he had this tiny little voice, and he said, well, I remember a couple of years ago in Novice, I had 189 goals in 12 games, and I realized I might kind of have a scoring touch. That's really cool. And to see him develop to the player and young man he has, he's 35 years old now, so we're going back a while. But I've got nothing but roses to throw in the direction of Sidney Crosby. I think he's absolutely all an athlete could be.
At what point did you know you were introducing a phenom to Canada?
Right then. And every year after that, I would do a story on Sidney from age 8, and then one at age 9. And every year, the only question with him was, would he get big enough? Because he was a little small. But once he hit the 5'11", 6 feet, and his lower body in particular filled out, you realized when he was 9, you were watching the best 9-year-old hockey player in Canada and maybe the world. And then as those ages increased, by the time he was 14, he was the best 14-year-old hockey player on the planet. And by the time he was 16, he was playing for the Canadian World Junior Hockey Team. So the fact that it was really special was obvious early, but I had to sell it to the folks up the line at CBC in Toronto, because they weren't accustomed to the best player in the world being from the Maritimes, and in particular Nova Scotia. And so that Ontario-centric attitude, I had to work hard to make them overcome that and look this way. And I think they're glad they did, because Sidney's proven everybody right.
Tell you, they might not have been used to seeing elite hockey players and come out of Nova Scotia, and I should just say elite athletes, because right now the crop that just has come out in the last 2 generations is world class. But the broadcasters that have come out of this region, yourself included, are world class. We look at Robertson, Dan just going over to work the Winnipeg Jets TV job, Ken Reed, Arash Madani, but I've got a soft spot in my heart for Danny Galvin, as do you. What is it about this maritime connection to broadcasting and in our case sportscasting, do you think that kind of elevates people from this region to that platform?
I actually think there is something in the water, as we like to say. And what that is a culture that from the very beginning here was based around storytelling. I think Maritimers are good storytellers. We like to sit around a fire with a guitar and talk and tell stories. And every community has a storyteller and a character. And it's fun to get to know that person and learn their stories. And we like to ask questions, and we're curious / sometimes nosy. Those are all great characteristics for a broadcaster, and they're characteristics that are really, really indigenous to Nova Scotia. And you mentioned Dan Robertson. That's one of my favorite stories I've ever encountered, because there's a guy, you want to talk about paying your dues. Here's a guy that never gave up, came back year after year to work for whoever would have him, including Eastlink Community TV, and just did a great job and got better and better every year. And by the time he reached a certain point, you were saying to yourself, this guy could work anywhere. And thank goodness that somebody agreed, because he's a great, great guy, a wonderful broadcaster, and great things are happening for him. But it's proof that if you work hard and you believe, and you have people around you that believe as well, the sky or the NHL can be the limit.
Well, I think Dan's next stop is Hockey Night in Canada. I know he's just starting the Jets TSN job. I don't want to put the kiss of death on him, but I feel like we've seen him develop for years here. He got over so big with the radio job with TSN Montreal, and now to see him on this stage with Winnipeg. And I think he's I the skills that he brings to a broadcast and really his call, I think will elevate people turning in to watch the Jets as much as their play on the ice, because he is that good, and he's given me a lot of advice. What's some of the advice that you have heard over your young career that kind of sticks out?
The big thing is, if you're talking to someone, to listen, and that sounds easy, but to really listen. Don't be looking down at a piece of paper and reading your next question before the answer's over. Really listen, because the real magic in an interview comes when you listen and follow up on a little nugget that has just come your way. I think that's remarkable. And in the actual sort of art of play-by-play, it was the great Don Whitman who told me that you don't get paid by the word. And sometimes it's counterintuitive to be silent, but oftentimes it's best to be silent, and less can be more. And you don't need to talk wall to wall, especially if it's a TV broadcast, and especially if there's a crowd that's supplying some atmosphere. So even though you're being paid, you think, by the word, you're not. You're being paid to be clever and to quarterback and to listen and to, when it's appropriate, just be quiet.
Now, check doesn't change, eh, Bruce?
Well, but no, you're absolutely right. And you also never get criticized for something you don't say, which is true. But if you listen to the people that do it extremely, extremely well, and you'll hear, baseball World Series stuff is coming up. You're going to hear, I guess, Joe Buck will be doing some again. But the way he uses the crowd, even when he calls football games, the way Bob Cole would use the crowd on Hockey Night in Canada, Danny Gallivan would use the crowd. They just knew when to be quiet. Al Michaels, who, whatever sport he calls, he always describes it as the game is the melody and you're supplying the lyrics, but you don't have to sing the whole time, right? Sometimes there's a good instrumental. So those were the best pieces of advice I heard.
So we go back to you getting your chemistry degree, but you've always had the broadcast bug. So what was it that drew you into broadcast? What was it that hooked you?
Just so I grew up, when I grew up, I'm a little older than you, but I grew up in the era of Danny Gallivan on Hockey Night in Canada, and Dick Stockton coming from Boston, calling Boston Red Sox games. And for whatever reason, I was as intrigued by what they were saying as what Guy Lafleur or Carl Yastrzemski were doing. And I loved how they would get into and out of segments and into and out of ideas. And I don't know why that hit, but it really, really hit. And then through high school, the idea of standing up in front of a crowd never bugged me. And when I was offered a TV show in high school, which I gladly took on Dartmouth Cable, once you get the bug, there's a very special feeling when you know that you've been able to communicate an idea well. It's a real rush that comes back to you. So whatever that gene is in me or in you, when you have it, and there's nothing quite like it when you get that feeling.
I've heard you talk about you want it to be Carson. You want it to have a bit of Johnny Carson there. Do you think that's a lost art right now, the Johnny Carson style of interview? Do you see?
Yeah.
Where do you, I know you see it a lot. You'll see it sometimes at podcasts, but really being quick with it and just able to put over whoever you're talking to.
It's a great art, and it was interesting you mentioned Carson because he was the best to ever do it. Now, when he'd have Robin Williams on, and Robin Williams was on a roll, Johnny Carson would basically introduce him and then have the smarts to stay out of the way until it was time to throw to commercial. That was genius. His also genius aspect was the fact if he had somebody on who was nervous, who was struggling, he would help them along. And in the end, you'd say, boy, that was really smooth. And you watch it back and you saw just how good he was. So short answer to your question is yes, but it all comes back to the idea of listening, knowing who's beside you, knowing what their strengths are, being prepared, and having the confidence to be quiet if your guest is on a roll.
Now we've talked the sports, we have talked interviewing, but let's talk about something that's pretty structured. 14 years with CBC Compass in the newsroom in PEI. What is it that makes Compass such an institution on the island?
I think the biggest thing is that there's really good reporters, and there always have been, who get out into the community and tell stories that matter to people. And on that island, politics matters to people, fishing matters to people, agriculture matters to people, and we had experts in those fields who knew who to call, knew how to tell the story, and knew how to make it important to islanders. So first and foremost, it was that. And secondly, I think that when I hosted it with my weatherman Boomer Gallant, I really think that people like to watch two people on TV who clearly get along and can tease each other and are self-deprecating and know that, you're not taking this home or feeling it too hard. It's just for fun. And Boomer and I were that. Johnny Carson and Ed McMahon were that. I think there's a history in TV of if you put two people on TV that clearly enjoy each other's company, that's really comfortable for you to watch and it's really enjoyable for you to watch.
For when you bring up Boomer, and again, we're over in Nova Scotia. We only heard the tales, and we see clips occasionally of the antics between the two of you. 14 years of it, and you talk about the chemistry. How much of that between the two of you would have been just called on the fly? Like, because I know, again, I know news is so structured for the chemistry between you two to go back and forth.
Yeah, so if you broke it down, we talked for about, in total, a minute a night in a 60-minute show. None of that was ever structured. It just, whatever happened, however it went off the rails, we tried to put it back on. Some nights we did, some nights to glorious effect we didn't. And so to answer your question, it was never ever rehearsed. It was always just, just two guys, two broadcasters having a great time with one another, enjoying each other's company, and knowing that wherever the other guy went, the other guy would be okay.
I got a small taste of it when I got to work Smitty, Mike Smith, over with Islanders games, and finding that island humor. And I'd say Boomer is a fine example of island humor. How long did it take you to kind of clue into island humor from Boomer in that style?
First night, I mean, this guy is an island legend. I knew who I was going to be working with, and I had seen the tapes. And here was a guy, he basically every night worked really hard to make me smile at the very least and laugh at the very most. And so I appreciate that effort. I love that. And behind it all, there were two guys who took their job seriously, but knew also that a 60-minute news show could be pretty darn serious and that a moment of levity here and there is not necessarily a bad thing.
Which, I'm glad you bring up it's serious. You've called Olympic gold medal curling. Does the drama of calling, and gold medal moments for Team Canada, does the drama of that match being in the newsroom for PEI provincial elections?
Oh boy, that's a great question. You know what? They're both the same in this respect. They're drama without a script. And what I mean by that is you might have an idea going in of what's going to happen, but you really don't have a clue what's going to happen. And if you're prepared and ready, you have a good chance of having whatever happens make sense. And you have a good chance of tying it all together. So a great sport event and a great election are the same in that regard. And it's very comparable, actually. I think it's very intuitive of you to tie those two together. Very comparable. They're both a rush in a slightly different way. There's nothing really that can match a Canadian athlete winning a gold medal. However, when you're on PEI and you know how important these results are to your audience, that's pretty big too.
Do you miss it? The news aspect of it?
I think Mavs, I did it long enough, and I think it was time to turn it over. As I've gotten older, what I enjoy more is the unscripted, sometimes even unwritten aspect of sport. You sit down, and all of a sudden there's this canvas in front of you, a curling match, and as I say, you don't have a clue what's going to happen. It's your job to make it fun for the viewer. That as I've gotten older has become, I think, more enjoyable.
So you're also a big Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling fan, and a big and so first off, I'll go into favorite star from Atlantic Grand Prix from your era.
Okay. Most fun to watch because he was such a great athlete for his size was Big Stephen Pettipaw, had an incredible drop kick. Most beloved, Leo Burke. But for me, the most entertaining was this villain by the name of Killer Karl Krupp, who would make me laugh so hard every week. Phenomenal German accent, great monocle, incredible finishing move, the claw. That was a great era, man. And those guys were bigger than life for me. And I loved Killer Karl. Even though he was a bad guy, I found him enormously entertaining.
So when it comes to watching pro wrestling, how much of that would you take from, I guess, watching wrestling to applying it to being an on-air personality and taking some lessons from that sport and using it in your profession?
Well, you know what? I think that what I took from that is that sometimes it's okay to be a little larger than you feel that day, and I think it's important. And I think the fact that they always knew they were putting on a show with a bit of twinkle in the eye, I realized that early on. And so I think, when you broadcast, sometimes if you're in a, I don't know, lousy mood or not feeling good physically, you sometimes got to amp it up for the audience, because ultimately they're there to be informed and entertained. And that, I think, is the very essence of pro wrestling. Amp it up to entertain the audience. So that was a lesson I kind of realized early on.
And I guess we're coming near the end of it. You, like many Maritimers, would listen to American sports radio at night. Do you find that is a distinctly maritime thing to do? Because we would pick up the AM stations at night, where across Canada, I'm not sure if that phenomenon happens, and I don't know if you've been around and talked to guys that are in the business that grew up listening to the stations from across the border.
Radio and TV, and I mentioned earlier, when I was a kid, the Boston Red Sox games were on all the time, and Dick Stockton and Ken Harrelson were the broadcasters. And you could pick up the great stations out of Boston too, and you learn from them, I think, passion, how to suppress abject homerism. I think that Dick Stockton and Ken Harrelson always wanted the Red Sox to win, but they still called a pretty neutral game. But the fact that you could pick it up, and I guess in terms of, nighttime clarity of the sky, that's why Boston radio was so clear, and New York radio too. But the fact that we were tied to Bangor, Maine on our cable stations, and picked up all the Red Sox and then later Celtic and Bruins stuff. The Boston sports scene, Boston's pretty close to us, and there's not too big a gap between a Haligonian and a Bostonian. So you learned what was important, and you learned what passion was all about, for sure.
Well, and when you talk about passion, your son Mark is one of the best tennis players in Nova Scotia right now, and your son Alistair's very big into film. So you've got both aspects covered: the sport and the entertainment.
Yeah, and I'm a very lucky guy. They're both very funny, good young guys who are hopefully going to do great things in the world. And both their mom and me are really proud of them. So thank you for bringing up Mark and Alistair. They're my men.
What's up next for you, Bruce? Where we're going to see you here on on the Legends of the Hall,
Yeah.
and we're going to see you on induction night, one of the biggest nights of the year for you. What else is coming down the pipe for you?
Oh, Mavs, we got to get a hall built. Getting any construction done in 2022-23, as I've learned, is not the easiest thing. Supplies aren't prevalent, nor are workers, but we're going to get that done, and we're going to have a Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame that I think every Nova Scotian, no matter your age or socioeconomic or gender or race, you can all come here and be really proud of it. And on a personal note, I'm really glad that CBC continues to call for major events, and I hope that I've got 2 or 3 more Olympics in me. I love to call tennis and curling, and they seem to be happy with the job I do. So I hope that relationship continues as well.
Well, Bruce, they got the next 6, so let's see if you can get a half dozen out of it.
That'd take me to a pretty special age, Mavs, and I'd enjoy that. So yeah, I'm with you. If you want to be my agent, let's sign up right now.
Hey, I'll take 7%. We're all good. Bruce, it's virtual, so I can extend my hand to give you the shake there. But thanks again, my friend, for coming aboard. And I can't wait to see you back here for Legends of the Hall. It's always a sellout in the truck when we get some of the broadcast legends in to hear the tales. We spent an hour and a half out in the green room waiting for listen to all the stories from Steve Armitage. So always a fan when you come on in, and can't wait to see you again.
Yeah, Mavs, listen, thank you. And kudos to everyone at Eastlink. I've said it before. I've worked with, I've been lucky enough to work with the very best in the country. And I'm proud to say that now includes the crew at Eastlink here in Nova Scotia. No question.
Bruce Rainnie here on the Mavs Gillis podcast. And big thanks again to Bruce. Big thanks to you for watching or listening. And we'll see you next time right here on Eastlink Community TV. So yes, a big thanks again to Bruce Rainnie for coming aboard. I know I said I think I said the Mavs Gillis podcast on it, but again, I don't know what we're gonna call it. A gimmick. We're gonna call it something. Joel, do you got a? No idea. He's gonna punch something up, because we're just gonna punch something up together on that. I don't know. It's the ever evolving thing. But one of the main guys as well I gotta put over, and this was Scotty McRae. Scotty's been fighting to have a weekly sports talk show back here, and he's been fighting for us to
make something happen. Scotty's one of the bright producers here, does quite a lot of work. He'll be switching, he'll be directing. He did a replay on a Moosehead game. He hadn't done replay in a while, but he stepped up in big spots. Does camera, does scenics, flies the Eastlink Community TV blimp, a.k.a. the drone. But I say that tongue-in-cheek. I hope you all realize we don't actually have a blimp. We have a drone, okay? And the drone shots have been fantastic. They've been second to none. I think we should just have a show that's just drone shots of around downtown. What do you think, Joel? He's nodding. Tim Conway's over on the other side. Hey-o. Tim, what do you think? Drone show?
Definitely.
Tim's in. I'm in. I would mean I have to get my pilot license. They're not trusting me with a drone at all. I can barely keep this thing not broken. Imagine me with a drone. Anyways, this was a nice time to put a bow on it. Again, thanks again to Bruce Rainnie. Have even more coming up on the Twitter and on YouTube and wherever this takes me. I mean, again, I'll look at it. I say it's like the gimmick, what we did with Kevin and Kenzie back in the day, which was so much fun. Some of my best memories over that time was doing the gimmick. And like I will say, like, you know, to give flowers to an organization that started out with a gimmick that's turned into something really interesting is Devin and Colleen from CBC with that curling show. That was something that, again, was really just an online, hey, let's do a Zoom call and have the people tune in if they want to. And that curling show has really taken off. So I look at, this is where, maybe a branching tree of broadcasting is going towards the way of gimmicks. And hey, we got no better person to do the gimmick than the old gimmick boy. All right. See you next week.